Happy snowy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another Hog Roundup with Tye Richardson. Tye, last week we came on here and kind of cautiously talked about the Tennessee game coming forward. You and I were both pessimistic, to put it very, very lightly. That came to fruition. Arkansas fell to Tennessee, had a chance to bounce back against Ole Miss, did not bounce back against Ole Miss, fell 73-66. To Ole Miss inside Bud Walton in the SEC home opener. There's a lot of different directions I guess we can go with this, but I'll just keep it general. Where are you at with this team right now after the first two SEC games and after that loss to the Rebels on Wednesday?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of negatives, not many
Yeah.
positives. 24-point loss, 7-point loss at home. Just wasn't able to put up many points against Ole Miss, which is a good defensive team under Chris Beard. I think it's kind of like what Chuck Martin was talking about today, is just get the offense going, get out some transition, get some easy points, get DJ and Boogie some better looks. The offense really became stagnant in that second half. I don't feel great about this game tomorrow. I wish I could inject some positivity for Arkansas tomorrow, but then I like where they're, at least the schedule sets up these next three games, Jacob, with LSU, Missouri, and then at home against Georgia.
Yeah, no, that's about as, I think we talked about that a little bit. That's about as gettable of a stretch as you're going to get when it comes to SEC play. But it's right now, it's just a team that when you kind of look across the board, if Boogie Flan doesn't show up, this team's going to struggle 5 of 20 or whatever it was against Ole Miss. And it's also the type of deal where with the way this roster is built, you need every single piece to show up or this team isn't going to play to its full potential. So it's great that, Adu Thiero has a bounce back game, but when you get 2 points in 17 minutes from Jonas Adu, it's hard for this team to play well. It really is, every piece needs to play well, and that's going to be the same case tomorrow against the 8th ranked team in the country.
Yeah, Adu, I think, was 7 of 12 for 17 this last game, so he looked good. I know he had a dunker too that he wish he could have had back, but he's been their most consistent player. You mentioned the kind of the injuries. I know that Big Z dealing with that ankle still. Apparently he did something. We got to get this guy some ankle braces. I mean, I had a buddy in high school, Jacob, who I swear twisted his ankle every other game. I felt bad for him. Was that you?
Well, okay. Same way, yeah.
Same way. It's just a bummer, but injuries have plagued this team thus far. It's only going to get more physical in SEC play, which unfortunately attrition happens during the midst of conference play and really any sport. So, they got to get back in a rhythm. It's hard to against one of the best teams in college basketball tomorrow at 3:00.
Yeah, and Florida is a great example also of just the strength of this league, right? We talked about it a little bit last week, but you talk about, Florida loses to Kentucky in their SEC opener, and then they turn around and wax Tennessee by 30. That's the same team that beat Arkansas by 24, right? And so you just talk about the overall strength of this league. And you mentioned kind of we'll call it a gettable stretch. There's still road games, which road games in the SEC are going to cause you issues no matter what. But I was reading through Mike's preview email he sent out there. Did you see the stat that it's the first time in the 102-year history of the program that Arkansas opened conference play with 3 straight ranked opponents? So that's the SEC, right? And that's why this slate coming up in terms of LSU, Missouri, and Georgia is so needed, because you got kicked in the teeth right off the bat with that schedule.
And Jacob, to your point, Cal, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said this is tougher, more difficult. I'm forgetting the words that he used that maybe he thought it was going to be, because I don't think anyone could have predicted the SEC was going to be this good. Now, we're early. We're 2 games into conference play for everybody, so I don't want to make a rash judgment just yet when it comes to determining Arkansas or anyone else's fate. But, man, it is just going to be all over the place, topsy-turvy, up and down. And hopefully Arkansas doesn't put itself in too big of a hole where it can't respond after this.
Yeah, I think that's why the Florida game is so important. It just, they got to find a way to perform and perform well. You mentioned you didn't think it was going to go well. I asked you last week if Arkansas is going to pull it off against Tennessee, what needs to happen? If Arkansas is going to pull it off against the Gators, in your eyes, what needs to happen?
Well, John L. had 15 the other night, so I'll kind of bridge off that. Chuck Martin, similar to Chin Coleman, prior to the Ole Miss game, addressed how to get him involved, and they just want to expand on that. Now he gets a game back after having one of his best outings of the season. And I just think you build off that. You've got to play better defense than you didn't get some easy buckets. This team thrives in transition. We've seen that at times this year. And if you can get some easier buckets, because Florida, but you don't want to get into it. I don't know if you want to get into track meet too much, because this Gator team can get up and down too. It's kind of like you're almost feeding into what they like to do on offense.
Yeah. For me, it's exactly what you said. You have to find a way to continue to build the rhythm for John L. Davis, and then I touched
Mhm.
on it a little bit earlier. It may be unfair when you're talking about DJ Wagner and Boogie Fland what they have to do for this team, but it's just the fact of the matter. You can't have 9 of 33 for them. That's what they shot against
Yeah.
Ole Miss, and you know you could say, man, you're putting too much on these guards. That's how Arkansas is going to have to win basketball games, just plain and simple. So that's what Arkansas needs in order to stay in the game with the Gators. And I do think you make a great point about you. This team's comfortable. They put up 102 points or whatever it was in Rupp. They can run if you let them run. So
Mhm.
Arkansas is going to have to watch that as well. Hey, I wanted to flip gears here a little bit and just talk football overall, as well as one specific transfer portal signing. Today, about an hour or so, Arkansas fans here, and they're getting a familiar face back in terms of AJ Green, the running back who was with the Hogs for 3 seasons, transferred to Oklahoma State last year, didn't really play much because of injuries. Had 1,000+ yards, 6 touchdowns when he was with the Hogs. Obviously, I think the most famous run everybody remembers is that Texas run he
Oh
had.
yeah.
Long run to kind of electrify Razorback Stadium, but he's coming back on the other side of the ball, walk on defensive back. Just wanted to get your thoughts on AJ Green's return in an unfamiliar role.
Oh, I'm gonna give credit to Matt Jones because he was talking about it on our airwaves earlier
Yeah.
on halftime. He's mentioned several players that he played with at the University of Arkansas that started at one position in high school and then made their way to another position in college, or they played both ways in high school and then specifically chose one. Maybe they were better on one side of the ball, but they were needed elsewhere, and then they performed highly. So if this is where the coaching staff, I know they've yet to hire a secondary coach with Darren
Mm-hmm.
Wilson, but if this is where Marcus Woodson and T. Will thinks that he's best served, and Sam Pittman thinks that that's where he's can really play the most, and yeah, I mean, you could see about running back wise,
Yeah.
they still seem kind of sparse there, so
Yeah.
maybe he gets into rotation, but evidently the relationship wasn't severed to the point where he didn't feel like he could come back on campus and earn some playing time. So you'll see this. I mean,
Yeah.
the only one that comes to me mind for me, Jacob's Jimmy Wooden basketball, but they're two different coaching staffs. I don't know if this has happened for Arkansas football yet. You might have an example that I'm just not thinking about, but this is a very interesting thing that just happened within the last, like you said, hour or so.
Yeah. No, I didn't have an example. That's why I brought it up. I couldn't think of something like this happening. It's really interesting, and just seeing what he potentially could do in that role, or if he contributes obviously in the running back room or whatever it might be. But you mentioned, I think the point for me is a lot of the transfer portal. Everybody thinks about the high school recruiting. Hey, you miss a guy, and man, it's over, right? And you talked about that relationship clearly wasn't severed. That's something we've talked about a lot here in terms of you've seen that in guys with Crutchfield, with McCroy in this year's transfer class, right? Why it is so vital to, if you finish second in a high school recruitment, or if AJ Green transfers out and goes to Oklahoma State to play because he wants more playing time at running back, that's where you see the importance of not severing these relationships, because guys can come back to you in whatever capacity it might be. And I think AJ Green's a great example of that. And I think obviously Crutchfield and McCroy are as well.
No, 100%. I think of Landon Jackson,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
Texarkana kid, Pleasant Grove High School, had Arkansas, I think, within his top 3 or 4, elected to start his career out at LSU. Drew Sanders, another one
Mm-hmm.
that was thinking about Arkansas, started at Alabama. And they decided once they hit the portal that Arkansas was home. And both those guys had an impact here these last few years. So, yeah, I think and this isn't just for Sam Pittman, but coaches, like, they don't want to, like, try, and coaches more often than not don't do this, but they don't want to trash a kid
Yeah.
or anger a kid's parents walking out the door. And they've got to be patient sometimes, because sometimes a kid does really tick them off when they get told one thing and something else
Mm-hmm.
happens. But yeah, that relationship, that aspect you're referring to, Jacob, is so important for Arkansas, who oftentimes is not going to win that battle
Yeah.
4 or 5 star year out of high school, but later on in the portal, there's an opportunity that could present itself like it did with a couple of those guys.
Yeah, you just never know when relationships like that are going to pop back up.
Yeah.
It just in general, we didn't really talk football last week. What have your thoughts been just on the portal cycle for the Razorbacks? Obviously, the mass exodus, but now, getting some of the talent they have. Well, where's your kind of feel with this roster, and kind of as they try to piece back together the spots that they lost in the portal?
There's always going to be that exodus first, and
Yep.
then you're just hoping you can recruit some quality players. The Wooden kid from Auburn, the
Mm-hmm.
Cisse kid from Stanford are kind of the most recent ones, and Green is the most notable since he's been on this campus before. I was actually talking to a high school coach this week who has a lot of college connections and whose opinion I value and respect. And he just said it's so hard. It's like, can these guys fit? Or
Yeah.
can they play at this level? Some kids can because you bring them in from SEC schools. Like Xavier Sorey, for example, didn't play much at Georgia, but he at least was a 5-star coming out of high school, and he
Yeah.
had a scholarship to play in maybe the best defensive program in college football outside of Alabama prior to Nick Saban leaving. So it's such a crapshoot at times, and there's so much you have to evaluate within a quick 24 to 48 hour time frame. So I think that, like, position wise, maybe some areas that like the running back room that we alluded to, you wonder about. They added, I think, another offensive lineman. So you almost have to re-ask this question come spring, Jacob. College classes start this upcoming Monday for the spring semester, and then we'll see what happens after the second transfer portal cycle, because we might have to reevaluate what we think currently on January the 10th.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And you talked about fit too. That's where the job of these coaches is just so challenging, right? Because, Sam's talked about a fair amount that he feels their hit rate's really high in the portal. And I remember T. Will got asked, when we got him before the season in fall camp, what goes into the process of recruiting in the portal, and why do you feel like you guys have had the hit rate you have? And I thought it was really interesting just that he was candid and honest, and he said, it is about culture fit first. He was like, there are guys that we knew could play athletically, could play at this level, could be an asset on the football field, but we just, in conversations with them, didn't quite feel like they would fit within our program. And just trying to figure that out, I think you make a good point. In that short of a time period, it has to just be so difficult on these coaches, but it is the reality in 2025, and you don't really have a choice. You got to make it work.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because you think about, like, the hiring process. You think about, like, Alyssa and the rest of y'all staff having to vet you in kind of a quick process, and so many others that you're kind of rifling through, like tapes and other things. And this is such, like, they at least had the luxury of time, and our team had the luxury of time and evaluating, and obviously missing on me considering how bad I am at my job. But, like, they have to be so fast at that, and that culture you talked about.
Yeah.
I got to mention this even before you bring it up, but man, Marcus Woodson, I say Marcus Woodson, I'm sorry, Marcus Freeman, anytime that guy, the head coach of Notre Dame, gets brought up, he always pushes credit to his players, his staff, Notre Dame. I mean, if that's not the most likable guy in college football right now, I know people hate Notre Dame for whatever reason. I don't know who is, to be honest, Jacob.
Yeah. Hey, man, I'm more than happy to talk Marcus Freeman in Notre Dame anytime you like. His whole thing is team glory. He talks about that a lot, and it kind of is a weird phrase when I heard him say it nonstop, but that's his whole thing. And it's interesting the way they've gone about it too, with the portal being in the playoff. They haven't had a guy enter yet, and that'll happen after the season, but they made it very clear that, they want guys along for the ride with it. And, the best way I heard it put is he's done the impossible, which he's made Notre Dame maybe not likable. You can tell me, Tye, but he's made him not hateable, which is something that is just kind of crazy in today's day and age, knowing how people feel about Notre Dame. Did you have any overarching thoughts from that roller coaster of emotions of the Notre Dame Penn State game, the CFP yesterday?
A lot of Riley Leonard, Josh Allen comparisons. I know Drew Aller, he's going to have that in his nightmares, that interception for the rest of his life. I'm curious if that kind of propels him to come back for another year. But that defense comes up big again. Considering what happened in the quarterfinals and first round, for us to have a first game as good as that was, just kind of all made up for it. I'm hoping this Ohio State Texas game lives up to the billing. But I mean, I've been on Notre Dame for a couple of weeks now, thinking they were going to win the national championship, and last night just more evidence. And I just think that, like, I understand the hatred from those, and maybe the cockiness and arrogance that certain Notre Dame teams and coaches and fans have had in the past, but this team just feels different. And I wasn't around the 80s and 70s and prior with some Leahy and Rodney, and you and I weren't a lot around then, but it doesn't feel like that type of Notre Dame squad. But hey, people still hate him. That's part of the fun too, Jacob.
Yeah, I mean, that's why college football is just the best in terms of all that. But it definitely feels different, and it's hard to believe Marcus Freeman turns 39 today. 39 years old. And he's doing the job that he's doing. So it's a good reminder for everybody else. We got to get started and start accomplishing some stuff because man, he's got it rolling there. You got to I know it's only 4 hours away or something, so the game will probably be over. You might look like an idiot by the time people watch this, but you got a Texas Ohio State pick for me.
Yeah, and I think Ohio State wins, but Texas covers.
Okay.
I think Ohio State has just a little too much offensively
Yeah.
for Texas to keep up. I want to know if we see Arch Manning tonight, Jacob. Hadn't really seen him at all lately. And if Texas's offense isn't humming and Ohio State just keeps pouring it on, the Sark do what Nick Saban does several years back in the national championship game, switching Jalen for Tua. I don't know if he has enough cachet and he wants to go away because he's been pushing Ewers all year, but sometimes you just got to make a move, and we'll see if that ends up happening later on tonight in Dallas Cowboy Stadium at Jerry World.
Yeah. Ohio State's been on such a roll. They the best way I heard it put was they've looked so invincible. They just put literally you forget about what happened 5 weeks ago. In Columbus against Michigan, and just how poor that team looked because they look unstoppable right now. You almost wonder if they're due for a little bit of a letdown. I'm in the same ballpark as you, just from the standpoint that when you've seen Texas go up against defenses that have the speed that they do, you have seen Texas look like a drastically different football team. And, Ewers, you can make what you want of him, but it just when it comes down to Quinn Ewers, if he doesn't have play action and Texas doesn't have their run game to set him up in the pass game, it looks ugly. And that's where you wonder if you would see maybe the dual threat capability of Arch Manning or if they just roll with Quinn throughout. But I think the Buckeyes get it done as well. But again, that game's in about 4 hours. So when Texas pulls off a 30-point win, you and I look like
we're going to look dumb.
We'll see. Regardless, the CFP's been a ton of fun. Arkansas with a heck of a week as well in basketball core. We'll be back next week to break it all down. The Hogs taking on number 8 Gators. Hopefully a far better result, Tye, than the Volunteers game. We'll see. But that's going to do it for this week's Hog Roundup. That's ESPN Arkansas's Tye Richardson. I'm Jacob Morris. We'll talk to you next week.